Have you ever wondered if Yahweh was only known to Israel? Or could his name, his presence, and his worship have spread far beyond the borders of this ancient nation? Imagine this. Long before Moses climbed Mount Sinai, before the 10 Commandments were carved into stone, and even before Jacob became Israel, the name of Yahweh was already being whispered among people. But who were these mysterious ancient worshipers of God? How did they come to know the God we now associate with Israel? And what does this tell us about a much bigger divine plan, one that stretches across time and nations? This is not just another piece of Bible trivia. It's a truth that could completely transform how you see God's story unfolding. The deeper we go, the more we realize there's so much more to God's plan than we ever thought. What if His influence was already shaping history, long before Israel even existed? Are you ready to uncover the shocking truth? Drop a 777 in the comments if you're with me on this journey. Trust me, what you're about to hear will make you look at the Bible and God's plans for the world in an entirely new light. Let's dive in and explore this mystery together, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Who worshipped Yahweh before Israel? The shocking ancient truth. Let's journey right into the very heart of this ancient mystery.
Who exactly is Yahweh?
Picture for a moment that haunting scene in Exodus 3. Moses, once a prince of Egypt and now a humble shepherd, stands barefoot on rocky soil that suddenly blazes with divine fire. A bush burns, yet is not consumed. His heart must have raced wildly, his mind swirling with fear and awe. In this charged moment, Moses dares to voice what so many of us would have whispered if we stood there trembling. What is your name? Reluctant to flame comes a voice, thunderous yet strangely intimate, declaring words that seem to stretch across eternity itself. I am who I am. Exodus 3:14. Can you sense the weight of that? A God beyond time, beyond comprehension, yet choosing to reveal himself in language we could barely grasp. But it doesn't end there. Right after, in Exodus 3:15, God charges Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you." Hold that thought for a heartbeat. Did you notice the subtle yet earth-shaking revelation tucked into those words? The God of your ancestors. This wasn't some new deity appearing out of the desert mist. Yahweh had already woven himself into the fabric of their history long before Moses found himself face to face with fire. The Israelites hearing this, would your mind not rush back to family stories whispered around desert campfires? Of Abraham hearing God's voice under starry skies, of Jacob wrestling with a divine being by the river? Could it be that Yahweh's name, his very essence, was already etched into their collective memory, long before the thunder of Sinai ever rolled across the wilderness? The name Yahweh springs from the ancient Hebrew verb to be, capturing not merely existence, but a breathtaking reality of one who simply is, who was, who is, and who forever shall be. Think about the comfort of that. In a world that changes, crumbles, and constantly slips through our fingers, What does it mean to anchor your life in a God whose very name defies the passing of time? And here's where the mystery deepens, like descending into a cavern lit by flickering torches. This sacred name didn't burst forth for the first time from the burning bush.
No, Yahweh's name was already known, spoken, perhaps even sung by voices who came generations before Moses ever set foot on that holy mountain. Surprised? Many are. Yet, doesn't it stir something in your spirit to realize you are connected by an invisible thread to countless souls who called on this same name long before you ever drew breath? What would it look like if you, standing in your own modern wilderness, heard that same timeless voice calling out to you, "I am who I am"? Would you, like Moses, hide your face in wonder and fear, or would you dare to draw closer, heart pounding, to discover just how far back this divine relationship truly goes?
Let's wind the clock back, not by years, but by epochs, to a time when the dust of Eden was still fresh on humanity's feet. Imagine stepping into that primordial world, where rivers flowed unpolluted and the voices of men first began to echo across the plains. If Moses was not the first to tremble at the sound of Yahweh's name, then who was? This question lingers in the air like incense, drawing us deeper into the story. Clang with me all the way back to Genesis. Incredibly, we find the divine name Yahweh not hidden in some secret scroll, but right there in Genesis 4:26. It says, "At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And that Lord, it is Yahweh, Yahweh." Let that settle in your spirit for a moment. This was during the days of Enosh, the grandson of Adam himself.
Can you picture it? Humanity was barely learning how to survive outside Eden's gates, still wiping tears of exile from their eyes, yet already they lifted their voices to the heavens and called upon Yahweh. Isn't that astonishing? Only a few fragile generations removed from creation's perfect dawn, people were invoking the name of the Eternal One. How did they even know it? Who first whispered Yahweh under breath still warmed by the breath of God? Could it be that, despite humanity's stumble into sin, God was already bending low, revealing his name to any heart that dared to seek him? Fast forward through dusty genealogies and crooked family lines to Genesis 12:8. Abraham, a wandering nomad with promises bigger than the horizon, arrives in Canaan. And what does he do? He builds an altar and called upon the name of Yahweh. Notice the continuity. Abraham was not inventing a new worship practice or discovering an unfamiliar God. He was invoking a name that resonated through his ancestral memory. Doesn't it send a shiver down your spine to think that even after Babel's confusion, even after countless driftings into idolatry, the name Yahweh still echoed among faithful hearts? Could it be that through Asians there always existed a hidden remnant who cherished his name, even as the world plunged headlong after powerless idols? What if there were men and women who refused to let the sacred name slip from their lips, safeguarding it like a secret treasure passed from father to son, mother to daughter? See something breathtaking. God was never a distant spectator waiting for Israel to emerge. No, he was ever present, ever reaching, like a shepherd calling out into foggy hills for lost sheep. Even before there was a chosen nation, there were chosen souls, leaning toward his voice, building rough stone altars, whispering Yahweh into the starry night.
And doesn't that echo into your own life? Could it be that God's name, his invitation to intimate knowing, has been chasing you down long before you ever thought to seek him? If you lived back then, would you have joined Enosh and his kin lifting your hands toward the heavens with trembling awe? Would you have followed Abraham into foreign lands just to keep calling on that same eternal name? There's even more to this mystery, more threads to pull, more secrets to uncover. So let's keep digging, for this ancient trail of Yahweh's worship winds deeper than we ever imagined.
Now step with me into a scene wrapped in shadows and wonder.
In Genesis 14, a figure emerges from the mists of history, mysterious, majestic, and gone almost as swiftly as he appears. Have you ever paused long enough to truly consider Melchizedek? Picture it. Abraham, weary from battle, leading his men and their reclaimed captives through the rugged valleys. Then, without any warning, a stranger steps forward. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Genesis 14:18. Isn't that enough to make your heart race? Long before Moses ever climbed Sinai's slopes, before a single Levite donned priestly garments, there stood Melchizedek, already a priest of Yahweh, the Most High God. How could this be? How did he come to serve the very God whose name would later thunder from Mount Sinai?
This king priest blesses Abraham with words that carry the fragrance of heaven. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Genesis 14:19 and 20. Feel the weight of that moment. Abraham, the father of nations, stands before this mysterious priest and gives him a tenth of all he owns. Can you sense the silent awe in that gesture? A tithe offered not out of law, for there was no law yet, but out of recognition of a shared reverence for Yahweh. Now, let a question stir your thoughts. Where did Melchizedek come from? Who taught him about Yahweh, the eternal I Am? The scriptures tell us nothing of his family ties. He is not linked to Abraham's bloodline, nor does he trace back to Israel, which did not yet exist. Hebrews 7 pushes the mystery even deeper, painting Melchizedek as without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Hebrews 7:3. Doesn't that give you chills? Some wonder if this was a Christ-like figure, a divine whisper pointing ahead to Jesus, who would one day break bread and lift a cup in a far deeper covenant. Yet regardless of whether Melchizedek was a heavenly manifestation or a mere man entrusted with profound revelation, one truth blazes clear. The worship of Yahweh was already burning bright beyond the borders of Abraham's tent. Isn't that astonishing? Even as Abraham journeyed through unknown lands, God was sowing seeds of truth into distant hearts. He had priests and kings, worshippers of his sacred name, living and serving him in places Abraham had never set foot. Can you imagine how many Melchizedeks might have existed across ancient lands? Unknown yet faithful souls who built altars under unfamiliar skies, whispering Yahweh's name while empires rose and fell around them. And doesn't it echo into our own world, hinting that God's work is never confined to the lines we draw on maps or the circles we sketch around our chosen communities? What if you were living in the days of Abraham and stumbled upon this king priest? Would your spirit recognize something holy flowing from him? Would you have dared to bow your head and receive that blessing spoken in the name of the Most High? Melchizedek stands as a breathtaking reminder that Yahweh's reach has always extended far beyond what human eyes can see. Before Israel's law and priests, before tabernacles and temples, God was already being worshipped in places we least expect. And that means, even today, He may be raising up voices in hidden corners of the earth, calling on hearts that quietly know His name, waiting to reveal mysteries that still dance just beyond our understanding. Shall we
keep searching for more?
Let's wander a little farther down this ancient path. For Melchizedek was only the beginning. There are others hidden in these old scrolls whose lives shimmer with the same unexpected reverence for Yahweh. Consider Jethro. Yes, Jethro. A man you might remember simply as Moses' father-in-law, but do not let that simple title fool you. His story is far richer and far more mysterious. Picture Moses in exile, stripped of his royal garments, shepherding woolly, stubborn sheep across the barren stretches of Midian. The scripture paints the scene with startling clarity. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Exodus 3:1. Read that again. Jethro was a priest, not of some carved idol or pagan deity, but a priest who somehow already stood in service to the true God long before tablets of stone descended from Sinai.
Isn't that curious? As Moses led flocks by day and stared at desert stars by night, did he ever wonder about Jethro's quiet wisdom or the prayers his father-in-law whispered when no one else listened? Could it be that God had placed Moses under Jethro's roof to learn lessons about humble faith before he would ever stand trembling in the firelight of Yahweh himself? And watch how their paths converge again. After Israel's dramatic escape from Egypt, after plagues, parted seas, and miracles that left even Pharaoh's magicians speechless, Jethro comes to visit. What happens next might just astonish you. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel. And Jethro said, "Blessed be Yahweh, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods." Exodus 18:9-11. Pause there. Feel the gravity of those words. Jethro doesn't just offer polite praise. He uses the sacred name Yahweh, declaring him supreme over all other gods. And then he does something profound. Jethro brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Exodus chapter 18, verse 12. Imagine that moment. An aged Midianite priest surrounded by Israel's leaders, all dining together in Yahweh's presence. No rebuke falls from heaven. No angel intervenes to correct Jethro. Instead, there is fellowship, joy, and worship. Doesn't this break open your view of how God works? Jethro's story reveals that Yahweh's presence was never locked behind tribal fences. His voice was already echoing through distant lands, calling to hearts that dared to listen. It wasn't about bloodlines or banners. It was about souls hungry for truth.
Could there be more Jethros out there?
Men and women in forgotten valleys or foreign courts, quietly walking with Yahweh while the world remains unaware. And doesn't that reach across time to you as well? What if God's hand has always been broader than we dared to imagine, writing stories of grace in places we might never think to look? Could he be inviting you to see that his light was always piercing the shadows, spreading silently like dawn before anyone noticed it was morning? Jethro stands as a luminous witness that Yahweh's kingdom was never meant to be small. His story whispers that true worship transcends borders, languages, and family trees, and astonishingly, there is still more hidden proof in these ancient pages, more unlikely worshipers of Yahweh waiting to step out of the shadows. Shall we search for them together?
Now let your imagination drift to wind-swept plains far beyond Canaan, to a place untouched by Israel's lineage. There, in a land whose very soil remains unnamed to us, lived a man whose story might be older than the books of Moses themselves. His name, Job, and his life holds a revelation so profound it nearly defies belief. Plagued about it, Job was not an Israelite. His blood didn't flow from Abraham's veins, nor did his children grow up hearing stories of Jacob's ladder or Joseph's dreams. Yet woven through every chapter of this ancient text is Job's intensely personal, almost aching relationship with Yahweh. When tragedy strikes like a sudden storm, his livestock stolen, his servants slaughtered, his children crushed beneath a collapsing house, what does Job cry out? The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1:21. Pause and let that echo. The Hebrew behind Lord is Yahweh, Yahweh.
Isn't it astonishing? Here stands a man outside the chosen family line, blessing the sacred name of the living God, with lips still quivering from grief. But Job's faith does more than survive sorrow. It reaches into eternity. Hear his voice trembling with unshakable hope. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Job 19:25. Can you grasp the magnitude of this? Job doesn't speak of Yahweh as a tribal war god limited to tents and altars in dusty deserts. He knows him as Redeemer, personal, righteous, sovereign over all. And Job wasn't alone in wrestling with Yahweh's mysteries. His friends, flawed though they were, debated the justice, mercy, and purposes of God. Together they grappled with the same thorny questions that still chase us through midnight hours.
Why do the innocent suffer? How can a mortal approach the Almighty? Doesn't it strike you that long before Israel's priests offered incense, people far from Zion were already pondering the heart of Yahweh? That Job's story shows that the knowledge of the true God was not chained to Israel's borders. It lived and breathed among people scattered across the ancient world. People who argued, wept, worshipped, and clung to hope under unfamiliar stars. Didn't Paul later write in Romans 1, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, for his invisible attributes, namely, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world." The fingerprints of Yahweh are pressed into every sunrise, every rustling tree, every aching human heart that dares to search for him.
Beige.
So whether we peer into the life of Job lamenting on his ash heap, or glimpse Melchizedek blessing Abraham outside Salem's gates, or watch Jethro break bread with Israel's elders in the wilderness, one truth rises again and again. Yahweh was already there, revealing himself, stirring souls, drawing worship from unexpected lips, long before Israel carried stone tablets down Sinai. And doesn't this thread of revelation still stretch out toward you? If God could whisper his name to a non-Israelite shepherd in Midian, meet a mysterious king priest in Salem, speak comfort to a grieving father in Uz, what might he be longing to reveal to you in your own corner of the world? Could your deepest questions, your private wrestling matches, be the very soil where Yahweh chooses to plant his answers? This is why their stories matter. They are not dusty relics. They're living signposts, pointing us to a God who has always been closer than we dared imagine.
So let's step closer still and see what more this timeless God might want to unveil in your own story. Shall we?
Now, let your mind drift to a dusty road in a far-off land where a man sits astride his donkey, tangled in thoughts that are darker than he'd ever admit. His name? Balaam. And he might just be one of the most confounding figures ever to stride across the pages of Scripture. Here stands a man outside of Israel, steeped in questionable ambitions and shadowy motives, yet somehow he finds himself in direct conversation with Yahweh, the very God who thundered on Sinai and whispered promises to Abraham under the stars. You see how shocking that is? In Numbers 22:9, it simply says, "And God came to Balaam and said, 'Who are these men with you?'" Not a vague dream, not a fleeting impression. This is intimate dialogue, the same kind reserved for patriarchs and prophets. And when Balaam answers Balak's emissaries, his words tumble out with a startling familiarity. "Go to your own land, for the Lord, Yahweh, has refused to let me go with you." Numbers 22:13. Here, let that sink in.
Balaam, dwelling in Pethor, near the Euphrates, hundreds of miles from Israel, likely nestled somewhere in ancient Syria or Mesopotamia, uses the covenant name Yahweh. Not just any God, not an abstract Elohim, but Yahweh, the sacred name first spoken from a burning bush that refused to be consumed. How did this foreign seer come to recognize that voice so clearly that he could not only converse with it, but obey, at least for a time? The questions swirl like desert winds. Who taught Balaam to listen for Yahweh? How long had he known that name, perhaps whispering it under his breath when the moon climbed high over distant hills? And why would the Most High even bother speaking to a man who lay outside the embrace of his covenant people? The answers are laced with holy mystery. Yes, Balaam would later reveal the rot inside him: greed, vanity, spiritual compromise. The New Testament doesn't shy away from this, warning us in 2 Peter 2:15 and Revelation 2:14 of his twisted legacy.
Yet still, consider what happens when King Balak hires Balaam to hurl curses upon Israel. God seizes that moment, flips human schemes on their head, and turns Balaam's mouth into a fountain of unexpected blessing. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? Numbers 23, verse 8. Isn't that breathtaking? Even more astonishing, out of Balaam's flawed lips spills a prophecy that peers across the centuries straight to Christ himself. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers 24:17. Imagine a pagan prophet hired to sabotage God's people, instead proclaims the coming of the Messiah. Doesn't that rattle your expectations of who God can use? This story is messy. It's tangled, yet it illuminates something profound. Yahweh's voice is not confined by human lines.
His plans are not strangled by borders, bloodlines, or even the corrupted hearts of those who try to profit from his power. Balaam's encounters remind us that God has always been on a global mission, revealing himself far beyond the tents of Israel, long before Moses ever struck rock for water, and long after kings ruled from Jerusalem's throne. And doesn't that raise a gentle, haunting question for us today? If God could speak through Balaam, a man with feet caked in foreign soil and motives muddied by silver, what might he be longing to say through you? In your own unpredictable story, could your struggles, your half-understood longings, even your failures be places where God still chooses to make his purposes shine? Balaam's life whispers a truth that reaches straight into our own. Yahweh's voice cannot be contained. It breaks through flawed prophets, misguided plans, and even rebellious hearts, weaving a narrative of redemption that no one can thwart.
The only question that truly matters is whether we are willing to quiet our ambitions and actually listen. Would you have heard him if you were standing on that road beside Balaam? Perhaps in more ways than we dare to believe. He's still speaking even now. So after wandering through all these ancient landscapes, after meeting Job under distant skies, watching Melchizedek break bread with Abraham, seeing Jethro sacrifice alongside Israel's elders, and even standing near Balaam on that sun-scorched road, we're left with one pressing question that hangs in the air like incense. Why does any of this matter? Why take the time to trace how Yahweh was known and worshipped long before Israel carried stone tablets down Sinai? It matters because it uncovers something breathtaking about God's heart. It shatters every narrow notion we might hold that Yahweh belonged only to one tribe, one family, or one chosen nation. From the dawn of human history, his voice was echoing across mountain ranges and whispering through desert winds to any heart willing to pause and listen. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. Psalm 113, verse 3.
Imagine that. From every horizon, in every forgotten village and bustling city, Yahweh was already planting seeds of his truth long before Israel raised their first banner. Think about Jethro quietly tending flocks in Midian, yet already bowing before the Most High. Think about Job, grieving in ashes, yet speaking of Yahweh as his living Redeemer. Think about Melchizedek, standing mysteriously under Salem's skies, blessing Abraham in the sacred name of the Creator. Even Balaam, tangled in greed and flawed ambitions, found himself overtaken by divine revelation, uttering prophecies of a coming star and scepter in Israel that would one day point straight to Christ. Doesn't this widen your view of God's story? It was never small, never provincial, never limited by language or borders. Long before covenants were etched into stone, Yahweh was writing his name upon human hearts across the world, calling worshipers from places no map of Israel ever touched.
And here's where it folds tenderly into your own life, because maybe you've always carried the quiet suspicion that God only moves through certain people, those born into the right lineage, raised under the right teachings, fluent in the language of holy things. Maybe you felt like an outsider looking in, unqualified because your story doesn't resemble what you thought God prefers. But see, that's exactly why these ancient voices matter. They prove that Yahweh delights to reveal himself to unexpected people in unexpected places. His story has always stretched far beyond human boundaries, and that means you, yes, you,
are caught up in this vast unfolding narrative. You're not too far away, not too late, not from the wrong soil.
Could it be that he's been quietly drawing you all along, just as he did with shepherds in Midian and prophets near the Euphrates? What if your heart, even with all its questions, scars, and secret hopes, is precisely the kind of place Yahweh loves to visit? What if your life was meant to be another living altar where his name is praised from the rising of your sun to its final setting? That's the wonder of it all. His story is bigger, wider, and more beautifully inclusive than we ever dared dream, and your story is right at the heart of it. So, take a breath, lift your eyes, and realize this same Yahweh who walked with Job, who spoke to Balaam, who feasted with Jethro, is calling you by name even now. Will you lean in closer to hear what he might be saying next?
But here lies a truth more intimate and staggering than any ancient mystery we've uncovered so far. God sees you. Before you ever lifted your eyes to search for him, he was already reaching out, tracing the fragile lines of your story with hands that shaped the galaxies. Just as he spoke comfort into Job's storm of grief, just as he walked step by step with Enoch until heaven simply swallowed him up, just as he called Abraham out from the familiar idols of Ur into a future he couldn't yet see, so too is he calling you right now, wherever you stand. And woven into this breathtaking pursuit is the very heart of the gospel. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Romans 10:13. That name, Yahweh, has echoed from Eden's gates to your own threshold. In the pages of the New Testament, this name takes on flesh and breath in Yeshua, Jesus, whose very name means Yahweh saves.
Can you feel the tenderness of that? The same eternal I Am who spoke from burning bushes and through trembling prophets wrapped himself in human skin just to rescue you. So what will you do with this mystery that stretches across millennia to find its resting place at your doorstep? Will you dare to seek him even if you've always felt like you stood outside the usual lines of blessing? Could you begin to listen for his voice in your own wilderness, the way Job did on his ash heap, the way Abraham did under foreign stars, the way countless souls did long before Israel ever carved out its borders? Because the astonishing reality is that Yahweh's reach has never been hemmed in by geography or ancestry. He has always been crossing rivers, breaking down walls, whispering across languages and customs to find hearts willing to answer. Perhaps right now, in the hush between your heartbeats, he is doing exactly that with you.
Rachel, you respond to this God who has been stretching across centuries and cultures, across your own doubts and detours, to gently call your name. Could this be the moment you finally step into the great unfolding story he's been writing all along, where your life becomes yet another place his name is honored from the rising of your sun to its setting? Isn't that a mystery worth embracing? Now, standing here on the far side of this ancient journey, what does it all mean? We've walked dusty paths beside Job in a distant land, marveled at Melchizedek's mysterious blessing, shared in Jethro's joyful sacrifice, listened in stunned silence as Balaam's lips proclaimed Yahweh's sovereignty, and watched Abraham build altars to a name older than his own covenant. And through every story, one truth rises like the sun. Yahweh was never a God of borders. Long before Israel carried his name on banners into battle, long before laws were etched in stone, long before priests lifted incense in sacred courts, Yahweh was already whispering his name to hungry hearts scattered across every horizon. Isn't that astonishing? Doesn't it stretch your view of who God is and who He cares for? From the very beginning, Yahweh's heart has burned for the nations.
His love has always crossed mountains, languages, bloodlines, and broken stories to reach souls willing to look up and say, "Blessed be the name of Yahweh." And that brings us to you. Because maybe you've always felt like an outsider, like your past or your heritage or your questions somehow put you on the wrong side of God's promises. But today, let these ancient voices tell you otherwise. You are not too far. You are not disqualified. Yahweh has always been a God who draws near to unexpected people in unexpected places. Could it be that right now, in the quiet of your own life, He is reaching for you with the same tender persistence that sought Job, Melchizedek, Jethro, Balaam, and countless unnamed souls long before Israel was ever a nation? And here's the beautiful hope of it all. This Yahweh, whose name means eternal existence itself, has made Himself known to us through Yeshua, Jesus, whose very name proclaims Yahweh saves.
So whether your story feels close to sacred ground or still wandering in wilderness, call on Him, because everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Romans 10:13. If this touched you, if it opened your eyes to how big and gracious our God truly is, I invite you to let us know in the comments. Maybe even write 777 to declare your awe for Yahweh's eternal plan. And if you'd like to keep exploring these deep hidden treasures of Scripture with us, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that God's love has always been for every nation, every tribe, every heart. Paying you so much for Spender. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you, and may you discover that you have always been part of His breathtaking story. Until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and stay blessed.